You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at keeleycompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the two-time national best-selling author of On Fire and In Awe. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, the host of the Live Inspired podcast, and he's the real-life inspiration behind the major motion picture Soul on Fire. Each week, John interviews extraordinary individuals about their life stories so you can more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. Our guest today's name is Elizabeth Svoboda. Elizabeth is an award-winning science journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Scientific American, among many others. In her latest book, it's called The Art of Pacing, she explores how we can meet the demands of today without sacrificing our ability to thrive tomorrow. Today, Elizabeth shares why so many of us bounce between pushing too hard and pulling away completely. How athletes inspired her to rethink our relationship between effort and rest, and what it means to move through life as a more sustainable human being at a more sustainable pace. We discuss how to recognize the warning signs of burnout, adjust our pace before that happens, and make daily choices that support what matters most in the long run. Family, friends, if you are tired of feeling like your only options are to keep grinding or to give up entirely, this conversation today is for you. You will leave with a healthier way to think about productivity, practical permission to change your pace, and a reminder that slowing down at the right moment may be what allows you to keep moving forward in the long run. So buckle up and welcome my friend, now yours. Her name is Elizabeth Svoboda. Elizabeth, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
John, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Well, today we're celebrating your anniversary. We set up the entire podcast to celebrate how many years married to your husband?
19 years today. It's hard for me to believe, but that is where we find ourselves.
So, family, friends, my fellow listeners, we are what stands between Elizabeth and her date at a wonderful restaurant. So we're going to have a meaningful conversation, and then we're going to wrap it up and live the message that we're talking about today. I'm excited for that. For those who are tuning in for the first time hearing your name, and maybe they're unfamiliar with your work, if you had to introduce yourself to our audience, what would you say?
Well, I'm Elizabeth Svoboda, and I am a longtime science writer. I've contributed to Scientific American, Boston Globe, other outlets, and my book is called The Art of Pacing, and it's a guide to balancing short-term demands with long-term thriving. So basically, it's about how we pace ourselves in different domains of life and how we find a pace that nourishes us and sustains us and allows us to go for the big things that we all want to achieve and contribute to the world.
I find oftentimes my friends who are writers write what they wish they could have read years earlier. I wonder if that's true in your case. So rather than talking at first about the book, I want to hear a little bit first about the woman who wrote the book. I know you are living on the West Coast, but you grew up on the western part of New York. Is that right?
That's right. I grew up in Western New York, Rochester specifically, used to be Kodak town. Nowadays, most people work for the university or local types of businesses, but it's a wonderful place to grow up. My parents still live there. I actually was just there with my two kids visiting my parents. So it still feels like home in a lot of ways. It's always a good place to come back to.
We know what you do now professionally, but what were you like as a kid?
Oh man, I think I always had sort of this motor inside of me to communicate and to help other people understand themselves and the world better. I was definitely writing from the time I was about 6 years old. We were just starting to get computers in the classrooms then, and I would just type and type. And I don't know if the stories that I was writing really had like a beginning and middle and end, but they sure had a lot of pages. There was one that was like 20 pages long. The more I could talk about and write about and just convey what was on my mind to other people so that that could start a conversation. That's what I loved. And then that's what down the line I ultimately turned into my career. Communication and connecting in that way has always been at the heart of what I do.
Your dad used to call you a scholastic gymnast. Tell me what that
Yeah.
means, and what did it mean as he was saying those words about his daughter?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of felt like I was somebody who, and it was wonderful. Teachers would tell me, you have so much potential, you have so much talent. But I felt like in order to live up to their expectations of me, I had to do everything perfectly all the time. I was definitely a little bit of a perfectionist, maybe a lot of a perfectionist, and it wore on me over time. And as you alluded to, the sport of gymnastics, I was sort of obsessed with watching. At the time, it was like the 1992 Barcelona Olympics. We had these VHS tapes. It was like Kim Zmeskal and Shannon Miller. And in gymnastics, at that time, the score started from a perfect 10, and every mistake that you made, you would
Hmm.
get a deduction. So it's very much a sport that focuses on perfection, and every little mistake or every little waver is a bad thing. And so there was one day where my dad, he noticed that I was sort of watching these tapes over and over, and he kind of looked at me and he said, do you feel like a scholastic gymnast? Because he knew. I mean, he had high expectations for me, but more so, I think it was just sort of the culture that I found myself in. My teachers had high expectations of me. Even my friends were really talented, really smart, doing amazing things. And so I felt like to live up to any of that, all of that, I
Right.
had to be perfect all the time.
So for me, it's pretty easy to imagine what the benefit is in that. And there's a long list. But I also imagine with all these benefits, there's a cost. What's the cost to a young girl trying to be perfect, not only at the balance beam, but in writing and in math and everything she touches in life?
I mean, the short answer is you just can't keep doing it indefinitely. And I think in college, I really had an experience where I was trying so hard to do so much and I just crashed out. I was taking all these different courses. I was taking a course outside my major. It was like a biology course that I didn't even need to take, but for some reason I felt like I should take it. I was thinking about science writing. I was like, I need to do this. But it was actually beyond my abilities. And so I was just spending hours and hours trying to get this homework done that required like a great deal of math background that I did not really have. And it just felt like I was trying so hard. And yet there wasn't anything coming out of it. I wasn't getting
Right.
anywhere. And I just absolutely hit a wall. And so that was sort of my first experience of coming face to face with you are trying to keep a pace that you cannot maintain. And this is what your body is going to do. And this is what your mind is going to do if you try to persist in that, if you keep trying to ignore your limits.
What will happen if a young person, whether they're 11 or in college or beyond, what if they just continually push up against their limits and they continue that scholastic gymnastic course of aiming for a perfect 10 in all in everything? What happens?
Yeah, I mean, the timing of it is a little unpredictable, but I do think sooner or later there's going to be some kind of crash. It might be a mental crash, as happened in my case. It might be more of a physical crash where you start to see actual symptoms of pushing yourself too hard, where your blood pressure just starts creeping up. You start getting other symptoms of cardiovascular issues. It's kind of insidious because most of us can keep a certain pace for a day or a week or even a year, but over time,
Right.
you're kind of racking up this debt and you don't know exactly when the debt is going to come due as far as when are you going to crash out. And I think what people don't realize is that when you are in full-fledged burnout, it can actually take years to recover fully from that. There was actually one really interesting study where the researchers followed a bunch of people who had burned out, studied them for 7 years. And at the end of that 7 years, about a third of them were still
Wow.
completely exhausted and burned out. So there's a real danger of, if you don't either pull yourself back from the brink of burnout or being burned out, take steps to do significant recovery, that you are just going to keep limping along in this state of zombiedom. Like, I almost think of it as a zombie state. Like, yes, maybe you can make it through the day, but you've lost all the energy, all the enthusiasm that you used to have, and just every day feels like you're pushing the boulder up the hill, so to
Yeah.
speak.
So you and I went to slightly different universities. I went to the Yale of the Midwest called St. Louis University. You
Oh my
went
gosh.
to Yale, of Yale, the actual one.
Hmm.
And on my fraternity shirt for 4 years, we had our letters at the top, and underneath them, the words work hard, play hard.
Hmm.
And we did work sort of hard, but mostly we played hard. We had a wonderful group of guys, wonderful
Yeah.
fellowship, wonderful community. And
Hmm.
that, I think, kept all of our community from burnout and really even
Yeah.
from risk of it. Like, we were there for each other and focused, I think, on the things that mattered most. I
Yeah.
would imagine at Yale, your measuring stick is slightly different. And you mentioned that
Yeah.
in this one class, I was already dealing with burnout and I was stressed all the time and doing hours of work and completely behind the eight ball. What
Mhm.
kept you going and what did you ultimately discover?
Yeah. I mean, it took me a while to figure out, I guess, how to keep going. And I do think the friendships that I had and the connections that I had helped me out of it. Like, once I reached a point with people where we could share with each other about the struggles that we were going through, because especially when you're like a freshman or a sophomore at Yale, you feel very much like a lone wolf, and you feel like you are kind of competing with everybody else, and usually you feel like you're coming up short because everybody else is so smart and so amazing and doing so many things. But there's definitely this feeling of, we're all just like these individual ships orbiting around each other, but not necessarily like making contact in a meaningful way, because you don't want to show your vulnerability. But I think it was when I found people that I actually could open up to, and they would do the same, and start to see that a lot of people sort of felt the same way that I did. They felt alone. They felt like they were doing too much and they
Right.
weren't sure the way forward. Like, that was when I became anchored. And from that point on, I felt a lot more secure and a lot more motivated. Just like, yes, I can make this happen. And I'm going to give myself the grace. Like, if I need to take a little breathing room here, a little breathing room there, it's not going to be the end of the world.
You loved from a very young age journalism. You
Mm.
kind of saw yourself as an author from a very young age. And then you
Definitely.
stumble, I think it was more of a stumble, but you stumble into science journalism.
Yeah.
Why did you choose in a world that has so much blue water? Why science journalism?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some randomness involved in it. My parents certainly inspired me. My dad is a retired vascular surgeon, and my mom is a biologist. And so, of course, we grew up with a lot of conversations in the home about science, about the importance of science, about how cool of a lens that is to understand the world. So I always had that in the back of my mind, but it was when I did an internship at Britannica.com. So it was kind of the news site of the online
Right.
encyclopedia. It just so happened that I ended up working quite a bit with the science editor there, Paul Morledge, who was a wonderful mentor, unfortunately has now passed away. But I ended up working with him on a bunch of science stories. And I just found it so interesting to be able to hear from researchers about what they were doing, try to understand it and communicate it before the rest of the world really understood what was going on. And also to be a part of that understanding, communicating, okay, why does this finding matter not just to science, but to everyday people, to the whole world? And I just found that I had a knack for it and I really enjoyed it. And that sort of started me on that path.
You've worked with some really good, big, and well known publications.
Is there an early article that you were part of that you recognize, oh my gosh, I think I can actually do this? Like, look at this, like what I'm sharing with the world that is benefiting from this reporting.
Oh man, yeah, there are quite a few. There was one early in my career that was a lot of fun where this was in the era where Discover magazine actually had a pretty significant budget to send writers out to do travel. So I got to travel out to Arizona and South Dakota to talk with amateur astronomers who were helping NASA, who were helping the big space programs to identify bodies in the sky that might not otherwise have been identified. So it's just a cool story of how amateurs with a good telescope could make a real contribution to science. And you could just see how excited they were about making these contributions and being a small part of this bigger story. And yeah, I was just so excited by being able to communicate that and this idea of citizen science, that all of us can be involved in this amazing process that is beyond all of us, but all of us can play our part and add our verse to the poem.
Before you head off to Yale and before you even stepped into high school, you were also enthralled by heroes.
Mm.
What drew you into that? What was your first attraction into heroes, into those who step up and make a difference for others?
I mean, I was kind of a weird child and teenager. I read a lot of history. Specifically, I read a lot of World War II history. I think before the time I graduated from high school, I had probably read about every book on World War II and the Holocaust that it was possible to read. And one thing that really struck me, I think, in all of that and paging through all of that and wrapping my mind around how something like that could have happened is there were people that were sort of bystanders that watched what was happening to the Jewish people and didn't do anything to intervene.
Yeah.
But then there were also these amazing rescuers who took people into their homes for years on end, who, under penalty of death at times, would feed people who were in hiding so that they wouldn't get arrested, so that they wouldn't get sent to the concentration camps. And I just had a lot of questions about what makes the difference between the bystanders and the rescuers. What is it in somebody that makes them a hero, or that makes them maybe, on the other hand, shrink back at the moment that they most need to act?
I think as most of us look in the mirror and reflect on the story you're talking about and think about the stories unfolding and will unfold in the future, we know we're the ones that would step forward. We would for sure hide Anne Frank and the entire family. And yet the
Yeah.
reality is it's just not the case. Most of
Mm-hmm.
us shut the front door and most of us say, I'm sorry, it's not my problem. And most of us say we have our own children and we have limited
Mm-hmm.
food and rations.
Yeah.
So what was the difference between those who decided to step up and truly at least strive to change the world for the one versus the
Mm-hmm.
majority who decided instead to shut their door and not do anything?
Yeah, well, one of the really important differences was that the helpers, the interveners, often had important role models in their lives that not just had good values, but were actually doing specific things in the world to help. And so it might have been a parent who was helping with rescue, then other family members would join in that rescue. And so the values were important, like the fact that you saw everybody as part of the human family, and therefore you would want to rescue somebody who, even though they weren't related to you, you still, in a sense, saw them as part of your family. Like that was important, but you also you have to believe that there is an avenue available to take
Mm.
and that you can make a difference. And that I think is what often makes the difference. There's so many people out there that have good values, amazing values, but sometimes what makes the difference, just do a little bit of research. Like, I know I want to help these people. Okay, what are the pathways that I can take? Who are the people in my community who are making a difference? Can I join their effort? Can I do something to complement what they're doing? Can I start something new? So it's important to get really specific and bring those values down from on high into the realm of action.
Mm. Your first book was sort of focused and pointed toward this. It's called What
Mm-hmm.
Makes a Hero: The Surprising Science of Selflessness.
That's right. Yeah.
So, without reading for us the entire book, what is the surprising science of selflessness? Tell me about it.
Well, I think part of it is that we all have the capacity to do heroic things in our own lives. And it might not be the kind of newspaper headline making things. I think sometimes we read those headlines or we read those news stories that are so, almost superhuman feats of rescue. And we all think, well, I can't really put myself in that category. Or like there's this whole superhero story. We worship these stories about people who really do have superhuman capacities. And we think, well, I'm just an ordinary person. I don't have that in me, but I really wanted to remind people that we all do have that capacity and we can, in fact, learn skills to bring that capacity to life in the moment that we most need to do that. And we can even rehearse for the difficult situations that we might find ourselves in, such as if you have to stand up for somebody at work who's being bullied or being marginalized. And these are uncomfortable scenarios.
Right.
And part of heroic behavior, just like everyday heroic behavior, is being willing to endure that kind of discomfort in order to stand behind the values that are so important to you.
Well, I was going to ask you, are you born into it or is it developed? And it sounds like you're saying the answer is a little yes. It's a little bit of something you're born
Yeah, I
to.
mean, there's a little bit of both. Like, we all have sort of that nurturing in our DNA, that desire to help, but it has to be developed. It has to be brought out. And I almost think of it as like a musical talent where you need to hone it. You need to really think about what are the ways that I can make a difference or that I can be a practical helper in my everyday life, and then finding ways to carry that out, to become accustomed to that, to become habituated to that, so
Right.
that when you're not helping, it feels like something is wrong. And I think that the more we can all try to get ourselves into that place, the more unified we're going to be and the better off we're going to be as a society.
One final question around that book and the research around it. What is one thing we can do specifically to cultivate that hero heart, that desire to, whether we're wearing a cape or we're wearing a uniform, to just make a difference for the one in front of us?
Yeah, I talked with the researcher Phil Zimbardo a lot about this. Like, how do you practice to be an everyday hero? And he said it's important to start small. So just every day or even more often or a few times a week, whatever feels comfortable for you, just look around for somebody who needs a little bit of help. It might just be an older person who's leaving the grocery store and they're kind of laden down with grocery bags, and you give them a helping hand to get across the street, across the parking lot. And so Dr. Zimbardo's idea is that by practicing helping in small ways, it sort of primes the pump for helping in bigger ways. And I do think there's a lot of truth to that. And so that's something that we can all practice on the day to day, just looking for those opportunities. And then instead of just letting them stay in the abstract realm, we actually act on those impulses to help.
Well, since the release of that book, you've written another one and then another one while maintaining a very busy writing schedule and finding time to date and marry and have children and raise them up and move across the country and a million other things that have taken place in your life. And
Mm-hmm.
now, more recently, you're writing a book about pace.
Yeah.
It seems like a wildly different topic than the ones previously you wrote about, but I think there's a dotted line that connect them. So, why does the pace of our lives matter?
Yeah, I think they're actually connected in a more fundamental way than people might realize. In these heroic moments, what comes before the action is often the pause in the decision. And it can be, just a few seconds. It doesn't have to be a long pause, but the decision that even though it's tough, I'm going to act in a way that reflects my values. I'm going to act in a way that I can be proud of years down the line and maybe even tell my grandkids about. Those pauses are necessary. And just in a broader sense, I think that more of us need to build those thoughtful pauses, both short and long, into our lives. And I learned so much from, I actually, while researching this book, I got to spend some time over in France. And I'm not sure if you've heard about this, but basically in France, the entire population takes either the month of July or the month of August off from work. So they'll take like a month-long vacation. It might be with extended family. They will just sort of disappear off the face of the normal work world for that month. And what surprised me in my conversations with them is how important they found those pauses, not just for recovery and renewal, although those things are important, but for orientation,
Right.
for either confirming with themselves, I'm on the right path, or for reorienting, I don't feel like I'm on the right path. So therefore, what adjustments do I need to make? So I think that there's sort of pacing in the day-to-day sense so that you can get through the year with your body and your mind intact, but there's also pacing in more of a reflective, stepping back, reorienting yourself sense. And to me, that is the kind of pacing that gets us in touch with the part of ourselves that's capable of heroic action.
Several years ago on our podcast, we interviewed a woman named Judith Schlerwith, and she had written about Sabbath. And she
Mm-hmm.
grew up in the Jewish tradition and wasn't necessarily actively practicing her faith when we spoke, but she talked about this longing on her heart for Sabbath. She wasn't even sure what it was. She was just kind of racing around and life was fine and lots of deadlines were being hit. And then she recognized that she was completely burning out, that what she needed was what she grew up with, which was not only like Sabbath weekly, but this idea of slowing down occasionally in life, like you're referring to our friends in France who take a month off to be reminded why they work the other 11 months.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't occasionally pause, we forget why we run. So tell me about
Yeah.
the difference between being productive and actually flourishing.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about being productive, I think of the whole optimizer culture. There are so many videos on YouTube about essentially how do you squeeze the maximum amount of productivity out of yourself in the minimum amount of time? How do you sort of game that out? And then I also wonder with the advent of AI, Chat GPT, people are probably trying to max out even more, like,
For sure.
design a schedule for me that will enable me to get the most done in the least time and map out every second for me. And that's sort of the productivity culture, I think, at its worst. And in my book, The Art of Pacing, I really encourage people to pace themselves not toward that sort of vision of maxed out productivity, but more toward flourishing, which is about how do I pace myself toward a life that feels fulfilling, that feels meaningful, that's not maybe so much focused on racking up the top number of achievements or making the highest salary or grabbing the brass ring in whatever kind of way, but just about a life where I feel grounded, where I feel connected, and I feel like I'm making a true contribution. And none of that requires you to work yourself to the bone in the way that American culture so often encourages us to
Right.
do.
Why do you think our culture has built up this idea of the beauty of the sprint? And not only the sprint, but the sprint of a marathon. And if you're really good, the sprint of a marathon every day of your life. Why have we celebrated exhaustion as a badge of honor to wear proudly?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back so far. There were historians in the 1800s that were already writing about, Americans have tunnel vision. Yes, they're doing amazing things. Yes, they're building up this young country, but they also have trouble seeing outside of their achievements and outside of that path. And there's some wonderful things about the message I think that we have internalized about how we can do anything. It's led many of us to great heights, but I think what happens is that sometimes we reach those great heights or we're so invested in pursuing those great heights, and we find that we're really dreading getting through each day because the sacrifices that we have to make in order to
Interesting.
pile up, those rewards. And I've seen it so many times. Like people are so beholden to, I have to show X degree of output or I have to get Y promotion by the time I turn this age. That is so hardwired and so ingrained into us that, and also like to a certain extent, the pain is glorified too. The pain of pushing your way through to meet these goals. And you look back and you're like, was that promotion or was that product launch or whatever it is, was that worth the pain that I had to put myself through to get there? I think that we're not taking those pauses. We're not taking the time to consider what do we want to invest our effort most in, and most importantly, why? Like, why is this important to me and to the world? I mean, what is the legacy that I want to leave as a human when I'm gone?
There's a word I picked up in your book, stillness.
Hmm.
It's a word, I don't think the world uses it anymore. Stillness, like that sounds like a huge, colossal waste of time, please.
Yeah.
So I don't think we need to unpack why we are uncomfortable with stillness, but what's the beauty of choosing stillness in your life?
What I love about it is it kind of becomes like an empty field where anything could spring up, and what springs up might surprise you. I talked to a number of people while researching my book who had taken breaks of certain lengths of time. Sometimes it was a few months, sometimes it was a year. And they tended to talk about the significance of having just this open plane, enough room for thought, like the kind of deeper thinking and consideration that they just hadn't had time or energy to do on a day-to-day basis. And that the thinking that they did during that stillness ended up determining their direction for years or even decades after that. And I think that when we neglect that stillness, when we're not making those spaces to do that kind of thinking, we really are shortchanging ourselves in the long run because we're not kind of propelling ourselves along the path that actually would be the most fulfilling and would be the most generative in the long run.
So we have listeners tuning in to our conversation from all over the world, including our beautiful friends in France. But many of our listeners are tuning in from a place where they do not get a month off in the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are working and they've got the bills to pay and children to get dropped off and challenges galore and aging
Mm-hmm.
parents and diapers at home and a million things.
Absolutely.
Help them understand micro places to find stillness because it doesn't necessarily need to be a month in South Dakota looking up
Mm-hmm.
at a beautiful sky with fellow astronomers. This can be
Right,
stuff you do
right.
in your own backyard, regardless of where that is.
Yeah, and it's just about finding the spaces that work within the commitments that you have. One thing that I started doing as a young mom, I just remember feeling so overwhelmed when my kids were in that toddler stage that is so intensive and so hands-on. And it kind of felt like I would be working from home a lot of the time. So the kids would be there. Sometimes the babysitter would be there too, but also the kids would be there. And so I wouldn't go 20 minutes thinking before there was another interruption. And I was just like, it almost felt like I needed to grab some stillness. And it wasn't a good time in my life to go on retreat or to quit work or anything like that. So I started having some conversations with my husband, and we worked out a plan where I would go to a local hotel. We had this one credit card that had travel points, so I would use my points to book a hotel room, and then I would just have 24 hours. I would pick a place where I could check in on the early side and leave on maybe a little bit of the later side the next day. And I would just use that time for that deeper reflection. Sometimes I was writing. Sometimes I was just working on the passion projects, the creative passion projects that were close to my heart. But whatever it was, the important thing was that I was able to get into that deeper focus, that deeper contemplation. And it was just the first time I did it, it was just so energizing, like beyond what I had expected. And I came back feeling like, yeah, I can take on the rest of the week now. I can do this. And it took going back to that well, but 24 hours can make a real difference. So
Sure.
if you're not in a situation, like I'm not really in a situation right now where I feel like I can take a month off or take a longer period of time off, but almost anybody, like if it, through enough planning and almost anybody can take 24 hours, and it doesn't even have to be a hotel either. It can be like a bedroom at a friend's house, but someplace that's away. It does make a difference to be away from the scene of your domestic chores, of your childcare, like all that sort of cruft that collects around the edges of our lives. Getting away from that somewhere is what opens up the space for this deeper thinking, this contemplation, getting back in touch with yourself.
You've done a ton of writing around stress.
Yeah.
What have been some things that have really surprised you about the effect of stress on the human mind, on our decisions, on our life?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I have learned firsthand is that when I am in a stressed out state and I don't do things to address that state, whether it's calming myself before I get into a conversation or before I make my next decision, like when you were in that frazzled state of like fight or flight, your stress hormones are running, your cortisol is probably through the roof for those of you who are interested in like all this hormonal tracking and stuff. When you're in that state, you are not going to make decisions that serve you in the long run. You might end up getting in an argument with somebody that you then spend the next week or the next month trying to clean up the damage from that argument. You might make a rash decision at work that leads you to having to scramble around to clean up after that decision. And so I think the way I've started to see it as one important element to pacing is before you make the next decision, get your body into a calmer state, because when your body is in a calmer state, your mind is going to work better. And there's a whole bunch of science behind this too, that when our nervous systems are calmer, we are more effective cognitively. We are actually able to use our thinking capacity in a fuller sense. So I think some people think, well, I'll just try to get through, not worry about my body. No, you have to tend to your body, get that nervous system into a calmer state before you make the next decision.
So I'm thinking about some friends who live in stress. And I'm thinking about saying to them, you need to get your body in a calmer state and you'll be so much. And I'm thinking about how they react and it scares me.
Oh my
So
gosh, yeah.
tell me, like, when you're looking at a friend, or maybe you're looking at the mirror and that person
Hmm.
needs to hear this advice, how do I get my body in a calmer state when my life is chaotic and it's out of sorts and I have zero control? That's why I've got to run.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I should say I'm pretty bad at things like meditating. A lot of people will tell you you need to meditate for like half an hour to get yourself into the state. But when I try to do that, it's just hard for me to get into that mental state or even get into a quiet room where I can, I just kind of don't do very well. I know some people are really good at meditating, but it's not my thing. But there are forms of mindfulness that you can do more alongside other things that are going on in your life. And there's a specific kind of breathing, which is that really slows down your pace of breathing, and that science has shown is actually conducive to getting your nervous system into a calmer state. And it's called resonance frequency breathing. There are ways to find out your ideal resonant pace, but usually for most adults, it's between 5 and 6 breaths a minute. So about
Wow.
twice as slowly as you usually breathe. And you don't have to do it for that long either. You can now, like 10 seconds really isn't enough, 30 seconds might not be enough. But when you're doing this, and there are actually guided tracks on YouTube that you can use to help you if you're not sure about the pace. But when you do this kind of breathing for, say, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, I can almost guarantee you that you will feel this knot of stress inside you start to loosen up. And the nice thing about it too is you can kind of titrate it. Like you can keep doing the breathing for the number of minutes until you actually feel like, okay, I'm feeling more grounded now. I'm feeling more focused. I'm in a better state to make my next decision. And so I would just recommend to everybody to give that a try. Resonant frequency breathing, and there's all this science, there are all these papers on it, and I waded through all of them on the way to writing my book. But I also, it's probably one of the pacing tactics that I use most frequently because I do it almost every day just to start off my morning. And then also when a curveball hits, like when something really stressful happens, I just use it to dial me down from that state. And then once I'm feeling more grounded, I ask myself, okay, what's the next choice here? What's the best thing that I can do in this situation? And I just find that the answers are a lot more meaningful and likely to be effective
Yeah.
once I'm in that grounded state.
It sounds so weak, kind of, to like focus on your breath. And
I know,
it sounds
yeah,
so
I
ineffective. And
know.
yet, in our office, from time to time, we'll do this before a big meeting begins.
Hmm.
And what sounds so useless and not helpful to actually be effective is the very thing
Yeah.
that changes the temperature in the room because it changes the temperature within each individual. So the
Hmm.
advice is there's wisdom there, and so that's something you started to do to become
Yeah.
a little bit less stressful and a little bit more effective and to be in the proper pace. What's
Hmm.
something that you stopped doing?
Yeah, that's a tougher one. Let me think. I think I stopped getting into these thought loops. Like what I tended to do, like when I had a problem, I would just sort of obsess over how can I fix this? How can I make this go away? And that would just be running through my mind all day and getting in the way of anything else that I tried to do. And I had a really wise therapist. And basically, the gist that she got across to me was you have to learn to sit in things not being okay for a little while. Like you are doing so much frantic fixing that it is using up all your energy. So she said, just try it out. Just try to get used to this idea of, maybe things suck right now, things don't feel okay. And like, all right, things don't feel okay, but we're going to keep going. And I think just letting myself be okay with
Yeah.
not being okay. I know it sounds like a contradiction in terms, but it helped me. It conserved the energy that I was using before and doing all this flailing, all this like, I've got to solve this problem like yesterday. And I'm not saying I wasn't doing any problem solving, but I wasn't doing the same like fling myself against a wall or be like the fly flinging myself at the side of the jar over and over again. Sometimes there are things that happen and there are things that come up that are very difficult. And it actually can be really healing to admit to yourself, this is not good. This is really tough. And I'm just going to grieve a little bit right now. I'm going to move through this and I'm going to acknowledge what's happening instead of trying to push it away.
In knowing now your story and reading some of your books, it seems like much of your work focuses on contribution,
Hmm.
like really becoming the best version of yourself by focusing on others. And kind of a weird
Yeah.
paradox. Why is serving others so important to an abundant, effective, beautiful life?
I mean, it's so interesting. There's been all this great research on how the more we focus on others or on making a contribution in the community, we actually live longer, we actually have better cardiovascular health. So it's sort of a win-win thing where, to a certain extent, like the more we contribute, the more we ourselves thrive. And even things like if you were a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and you become somebody's sponsor, you are probably going to be in better mental health than if you were not serving someone else in your community that way. And so I think it really is true that what we put out there in terms of contribution, it's going to come back to us, tenfold, a hundredfold in ways that we don't expect. I think it's a balance. Sometimes when we get so much joy and so much fulfillment out of serving, it's possible to push yourself too hard in
Right.
that. And so I think you need to have a little bit of healthy selfishness where you are making sure that you get the rest and you get those spaces of stillness that you need so that when you do go out to help, you do go out into the community, you feel like your tank is full instead of trying to serve others from an empty vessel.
When individuals get to the end of the art of pacing, the book that you wrote that just came out, what do you hope is better in their lives because they made a change? So, like, what's the call to action ultimately?
Yeah, I think that focusing on streamlining in order that you can contribute more effectively to what matters most to you. So pacing can sometimes be about slowing down, but it's also so much about paring back what doesn't serve you so that you can use your finite reserves of energy to actually contribute more to what is closest to your heart and what matters most to the world, whatever that is for you. And so sometimes I think people think pacing is just about slowing down, dialing back, and to a certain extent it is, but it's because you dial back in some areas that you're able to dial forward in these other areas that are more likely to bring you fulfillment and more likely to make the world a better place. So I hope that in reading this book, people are able to streamline in ways that bring them closer to exerting more effort toward their purpose and then less toward the things that are in the periphery and that don't matter quite as much.
So, you've done so much research. This will be the final question before we shift into what's called the Live Inspired Seven. So much research, so much neuroscience understanding around this work, and you've unpacked it in several different books. You've also become a bit of an amateur historian on heroes, and in particular, the Holocaust, and those who stepped forward and those who chose not to. Many people these days are echoing what they're hearing from the media, that it's never been worse, that it's never been so divided, that there's never
Yeah.
been so much cynicism, there's never been so much reason to not have hope that tomorrow will be better. For those of us who are beginning to believe that signal in our lives, what encouragement would you offer us?
I mean, I would say that when I look out there today, I see heroes in our communities that are doing the best they can for others right now. I actually interviewed a lawyer who was helping people who were unjustly arrested to get themselves representation and get themselves freed if they're in detention unjustly. So if you look out there, there are people that are doing this work. There are people who are really committed to justice and living that out in ways in their everyday lives that inspire all of us. And so you might think that heroes are just out there in history or, there aren't rescuers today. They were just back in the 1940s. No, I mean, I always come back to that Mr. Rogers line, look for the helpers. They are out there. And I would say find them, go out into your community and find them and spend as much time with them as you can, because it's true that the people you spend the most time with are the ones who rub off on you. And I have friends in my community that are doing so much to serve people who were born disadvantaged, help them get an education, help them get to a place where they can make the kind of contribution they want to make. And so, yeah, find those people and hold to them with both hands. Yeah.
And I will add, as we shift into the Live Inspired Seven, and as you party with these people for long enough, in addition to hanging and partying and just thanking them, why not strive to become them?
Yes.
You find as you unpack the DNA of heroes that there's actually nothing exceptional about them, other than the fact that when everybody else was making excuses or cursing the rising water, that they were doing something about it, not only for themselves, but for others. So, my
Right.
friends, we wrap up every conversation with our guests here in the Live Inspired podcast with 7 questions. Elizabeth, you're capable of answering these. Get ready, buckle up. Here we go. Question
All
number
right.
one. You've read a lot, but here we go. What's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
One of the most impactful is the diaries of Etty Hillesum, and she was a Dutch Jewish woman living through World War II. And she started out like she was pretty much an anxious person, kind of like me in a lot of ways. She was very self-focused. And the funny thing was that as things got worse around her, as the persecution against her and her community kind of ramped up, she actually became like a more fulfilled and a more generative person. Like she just started directing her entire life towards service, and just seeing her journey from being more self-focused to being, I mean, I almost think of her as a saintly figure because she helped children get out of concentration camps. Like she was just doing everything that she could for people around her. And so her journey has just inspired me so much.
What is one positive characteristic or one beautiful trait that you possess as a little girl growing up outside of Rochester, New York, that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
I think a lack of self-consciousness. Like I would just go out there and sing and talk and not worry about what anyone thought of me. And as an adult, I think we all have these defenses that we put up, and I'm trying to work on not having so many defenses because I think life is more fun that way when you don't put up unnecessary defenses. So I want to get back to that lack of self-consciousness.
If your home caught fire, and hopefully it never will, but if your home caught fire and all living people are out and you have an opportunity of running back inside and grabbing one item that matters, one physical thing, what would you come racing back outside with?
This sounds lame, but it would probably be my computer because all my work is on there. And yeah, I just wouldn't want to lose all my work, all my pictures. It's really like an archive of my life, to be honest. Yeah, I would probably crash.
Listen, I think most of us agree that, yes, that is a very lame answer. It's also by far the most popular answer we hear around here. So, yes, I've got the
Got to be
laptop
real
here.
with you. Yeah, yeah.
If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who do you want to have seated right next to you?
I would love for it to be Anne Frank. I would love to hear her impressions of what her life was like and what she wanted to give to the world that tragically she wasn't able to give because she had so much potential wrapped up inside of her. And I just identify with her so much as a woman writer, somebody who maybe acts a little bit happy-go-lucky on the surface, but has a lot going on a deeper level.
What do you think that final chapter she didn't get around to writing would have been?
I think she would have been a journalist, and I think she might have been an activist for causes that she believed in. And I think, unfortunately, she died too young for us to really know exactly what those causes would have been. But I feel certain that she would have worked for society, for kids. She would have put the most of herself into the community that she could.
It's interesting that a little girl with this big dream of becoming an author became one of the best-selling authors of all time.
Yeah,
Through a diary that she thought was only for herself. It's a remarkable thing.
It is.
What's the best advice you've ever received, whether it came from Anne Frank in her diary or anyone else?
I think that I had so much fun. I spent a day with an Olympic athlete, Ajay Wilson, who is a middle distance runner. And she just really showed me the importance of slowing down. And she would take like 2.5 hour naps, and it just shattering the stereotype of the Olympic athlete who's like toiling for the entire day. And she just reminded me to take that space for myself and to find those spaces wherever I can for renewal, for recovery, so that I can go on contributing as she has for many years.
If you could go back in time and whisper some wisdom to yourself at age 20, to that sophomore at Yale, what advice would you give her?
Just don't take every single decision that you make on a daily basis so seriously. Like things that seem like a crisis now, you're not even going to remember in 5 years. So just clear away all that stuff that's going to become debris and stay focused on what matters the most and developing your talent, developing your gifts so that you can give back someday.
Well, you've run the gauntlet. We're down to the final question. Elizabeth Svoboda, it has been said that all great people and moms and wives of 19 years and other job titles that you own can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
That's a tough one. I think that she gave as much as she could, and she helped other people to see the best in themselves. I think that's what it is. Like she helped others to see the best in themselves and see their true potential.
Elizabeth, I think you have indeed helped others see the best in themselves. You've reminded us that there are great people doing great things in small ways all over the world still. And I think you've led breadcrumbs on how we can do likewise in our own life. So congratulations on 19 years. Congratulations on another book entering into the world. And thank you for being our guest on the Live Inspired podcast.
Oh, John, thank you so much. This has been a totally delightful conversation, and I'd love to come back anytime.
My friends, that is the voice and the heart of my friend Elizabeth Svoboda. She's the author of the book, The Art of Pacing, a guide to balancing short-term demands with long-term thriving. It's a great book. I recommend it. My name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. What a gift. Live with your soul on fire.
Well, my friends, what I love about Elizabeth Svoboda's message is that a meaningful life is not lived at one constant speed. There are moments to push, certainly. There are moments to pause, and there are moments to change course entirely. Learning to recognize what each season requires does not mean we're giving less. Instead, it allows us to preserve our energy for the people, the work, and the purpose that matters most. If you enjoyed this episode, I think you'll love the conversation I had a couple years ago with toxic productivity expert Isra Nasir. Isra shares how the constant pressure to achieve can quietly erode our well-being and offers practical ways to redefine success, establish healthier boundaries, and build a life that feels as good as it looks. You can check out that episode at number 790 on the Live Inspired podcast, or walk with me down the line through the internet into johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. We'll have in that show notes of today's episode a link to episode 790. Friends and family, I want to thank you for tuning in this time and remind you that the foundation upon which you rest is firm. The headwind is indeed real, but the best is yet to come. So for this time and until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. What a gift. Live with your soul on fire.
Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son, Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.